I was seeing family after family after family come in off of that medical superhighway. And so many of them had just left the superhighway, and sort of that conversation, there's no more we can do for you, you have to go to hospice. And it was unskilled conversations on the part of my colleagues in healthcare, but like totally unprepared. Families just blindsided and disoriented.
In this episode, hospice nurse Jan Booth takes a deep dive into advanced care planning and why upstream conversations that happen early and often make a difference in how we live as we age and how we approach dying. Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode is being sponsored by Halo Care. Whether you're supporting an aging parent or planning for your own independence, Halo Care empowers you to live confidently at home. From personal care and home safety to meaningful social connection, Halo Care gives you peace of mind knowing someone's always there. Learn more at halocaregroup.com/USA or check the show notes for the link. Halo Care, where technology meets compassion and home feels like home.
Hospice nurse Jan Booth has worked for many years within the intersection of quality of life and end of life. She's deeply curious about what creates and sustains well-being throughout the human experience. Her work trajectory has taken her from years at the bedside of hospice and palliative care patients to supporting the well-being of caregivers, and now into the larger community to further open cultural conversations about aging, illness, and dying. Jan currently works as an end-of-life nurse, coach, and educator as she serves as faculty for the Conscious Dying Collective's Death Doula training program. She's the author of Reimagining the End of Life, Self-Development and Reflective Practices for Nurse Coaches, which was chosen as one of the American Journal of Nursing's best books of the year for 2019. She's also one of the co-authors of Bold Spirit, Caring for the Dying, and Dying Matters, 8 Conversations That Can Change Your Life. You can connect with Jan's work and find her book at deathdoulas.com. We started this conversation talking about advanced care planning, and Jan and I share some of our own personal experiences. Jan also shares about the beauty of having conversations about death and dying. She offers her thoughts on the 2 topics that she thinks are the most important to include in discussions about end-of-life wishes. The conversation turns to how we can determine what's important to us. Jan says it's about asking ourselves questions about life, not just end-of-life questions. She emphasizes that having conversations with your decision makers over time helps them to understand what you want and what you don't want. It's never a one and done conversation. She discusses the difference between a DNR, do not resuscitate, and AND, which stands for allow natural death. You can connect with Jan and find her book, Dying Matters, 8 Conversations That Can Change Your Life, at deathdoulas.com. Stay engaged for this whole conversation with Jan Booth. There's a lot to learn. Jan, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I just finished talking to your partner in crime, Trish Rux.
You did?
I did.
Oh.
So now we're going to compare notes and see what answers we get from you.
That's perfect.
We will decide whether everything Trish told us about you is true.
None of it's true. None of it's true.
Well, we didn't actually talk about you. Of course, we talked about death and dying and all things end-of-life doula, like, all the cheerful topics that we talk about on the show. But I want to start with an icebreaker question. I like to do this with my guests. One of my favorite things to use is the end-of-life deck.
Oh, yeah.
If you're familiar with them, this is a small set of cards that was written by a hospice social worker. And it's all about death and dying related topics, but they're great conversation starters for actually end-of-life workers and doulas, hospice workers, to start conversations with patients and families in a way that just pulls one small thread to get a topic started. So here is your question. When I can no longer tell you what I want to hear, please play A, my all-time favorite music playlist, B, audiobooks or inspirational words, or C, the sounds of the ocean or a river with a bedpan nearby.
I really like that third one, but it would be the first.
Your playlist?
Yeah, music is such an important part of my life. I love listening to music, and I'm a musician myself, and I've thought a lot and have put together a variety of end-of-life playlists. So hopefully my loved ones who would be caring for me would know that. And there's different playlists for, when I'm more active, maybe like the question, I'm not able to speak for myself, but I'm still more engaged in life. And then a different playlist when I'm getting closer to dying, which would be more spacious and fewer words.
Yeah, a little bit quieter and calmer.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. It's interesting. I realize there are only 3 options, but there is not an option to choose no music or sound, just to have quiet and silence.
Yes. And that is what I would want even closer in that kind of vigil time, is as much as I love music, is the quiet that doesn't keep me attached to this life where I have loved music. Yeah, quiet. I think that would be a really good addition. Although I get what they're getting at. It's mostly to start conversations.
Right. But see, even between the two of us, we're sort of sussing out what we would like. And I like the idea of the nature sounds towards the end. If you wanted a little bit of something, maybe some white noise in the room, I can see how that would be soothing.
Yeah, I've thought about that. If it were possible, I've thought about how beautiful it could be to be out, and even if it was in a hospital bed, out outside, like on a porch, to be able to hear, especially if it was more, I live in Colorado, so it's likely that it would be bird sounds and kind of the quiet of a mountain,
the wind,
a small mountain town, the wind.
Yeah.
Feel the sun on my face, but also just those quiet sounds. Yeah.
I love the sound of that. So there's some advanced care planning right there. Good job.
Good. Write it down.
So in your work, you are a hospice nurse and a doula as well, an end-of-life doula. What have you learned about the consequences that come with avoiding those conversations, both the emotional and practical consequences?
Yeah, they're very significant. I feel like that's what a lot of us who have worked in healthcare with seriously ill people have learned. We've seen close up what most people don't see. Um, yeah, so on several levels, some of the practical is the pain and suffering that can come when it's not clear what matters most to someone. And so these complicated healthcare decisions around treatment, around what if your heart stops, what if you are having trouble breathing, that it can lead to crises that are painful for everybody. Can be really hard for a family who's conflicted about it because they've never talked about it. Can be certainly hard on the person who's dying. And it can be really hard on the healthcare staff. I mean, the reality of moral injury and moral distress around having to do treatments and resuscitation on people when their bodies are dying is it's a modern dilemma, but that's one end of just having seen the pain and suffering when it's not acknowledged that someone's body is dying. So that's sort of one end of, you might say, one extreme of why it's so important. But there are two other areas that I don't feel we talk enough about. We talk more about, do you want to end up on a machine or not? It sort of make this extreme kind of,
the big intense decisions.
and that's real because that is intense and that can be really, really tough. But there are two other areas that I see very commonly and I hear about commonly that I don't think we talk enough about. And one of them is that leading up to that point where your heart stops and your breathing stops and you might be put on a machine, there are many, 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 many medical decisions that can be complicated. Living with serious illness and not having open conversations about what matters most to you. What are the goals of care we're hoping for? What are the benefits of the treatments that are being offered? What are the burdens? That long period of time, which can be weeks, months, or years, can be a really important time to kind of recalibrate and to pause and to say, do I still believe in this treatment that we're going for? Or what is the reality of the disease that I'm living with? And is my body trying to die? And all the sort of intermediate questions that don't get talked about when we don't talk about what matters most to us. So there's that whole period of time before death that I think can be fraught for many people. And I can see what a difference is made when people do choose to talk more openly with their healthcare team or with their families about, where am I? What's most important? What's quality of life am I living with now? And is this acceptable to me? And then there's one other area, and that is, you might say, the benefits, the gifts of having more open conversations. That when we talk more openly, it connects us. There's a vulnerability there. There's a kind of intimacy in talking about serious illness and living with serious illness, and being able to initiate the conversation about grief and sadness. And so there are all these missed opportunities if we don't, but then we don't talk enough about the benefits of that. So that's a whole area that I am finding I'm talking a lot more with people about, which is not just the shoulds, but what happens in our relationships and what happens in my priorities when I talk about what matters most to me now.
So maybe it's more about the coulds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What does this make possible?
That's right. What does this make possible? What does this do to our relationship as a family to get past that initial, don't want to talk about it. I get, what's on the other side of that? Right. And I've seen enough of that experience, and I've experienced that in my own life with my parents and with friends of ours, where that conversation has been more open, even if it was hard emotionally. And I wish we could talk. I encourage people to talk more about that when they have had that kind of very positive experience, because I think it's a real contrast to this other model, which is we don't talk about it, and then there's some awful crisis, and we look back afterwards and say, I wish we had done that differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of no regrets, if you can get that.
If you can get that.
I think that's a heavy lift. I think that's a big, big ask. So your book, which I absolutely love, 8 Conversations, Dying Matters, 8 Conversations that will change your life. It centers on these conversations that can transform not only how we live, but how we die as well. Which of these conversations, you've got 8 of them listed, which of these conversations do you think people struggle with the most?
Yeah, that's a good question.
They're all important, goodness knows.
Yeah, that's why we chose the 8 of them. In fairness, they're all important. I think I would say I'm going to say 2 because they kind of represent 2 different parts. The first one is in chapter 1, and that is this understanding of the big picture of healthcare. And without understanding what we call the medical superhighway, which is sort of getting on a track and not realizing that you can question, that you can pause, that you can reflect on what matters most to me. Am I doing right? So I think that understanding that we have more agency and more what's the word? We have more agency and we have more empowerment than we realize to take leadership of our healthcare direction and not just give it over to the medical world. So that's one place where I think, again, I'm back on the upstream because that's where so much of my focus is going these days, is these upstream conversations. So that's one place where we're not taking advantage of those possible conversations with our healthcare team and with our family and friends about what matters most to us when we're living with serious illness, when we get a new diagnosis, and when we're getting closer to end of life. The other conversation that I think is really challenging for people is it's chapter 3, and it's what we call heart matters. And this is the area, like you were saying earlier, Helen, about regrets and grief, forgiveness, gratitude. There's a lot that's possible in that world, but it's our fear of feeling emotional pain, our fear of feeling grief that stops so many conversations from happening. That, again, if we can just get on the other side of it, there are conversations and experiences that can bring us closer, that can help us to feel our shared humanity, that help us to feel we're not alone and isolated. So I think those 2, kind of the big picture of what matters most to me, can I have agency on the medical superhighway, and then the more personal heart conversations, especially we stop those conversations because of the grief that's part of the deal.
Yeah. Well, I love it that you've chosen the heart and the mind, the practical and then the more emotional, because it is a combination, right? It's holistic. Mind, body, spirit. You can't affect one without affecting the other too. I really like the way you guys call this the medical superhighway, because that's such a vivid image. When you think about a superhighway, sometimes that on-ramp, you got to speed up and go with the flow of the traffic, and you can't figure out, you miss your exit, right? Everybody's going a lot faster. You may be in the wrong lane. Yeah. And then it's really hard to get off of it. Yes. Right. That kind of navigation is so difficult. So I think that's a really good comparison. That's probably, analogy, I guess, is the right word for what it's like to navigate the healthcare system for a serious illness.
That's right. And I think, those many years, I would say this is true for both Trish and me, but speaking for myself, those many years at the hospice bedside meant that I was seeing family after family after family come in off of that medical superhighway. And so many of them had just left the superhighway,
Right.
and sort of that conversation, there's no more we can do for you, you have to go to hospice. And it was unskilled conversations on the part of my colleagues in healthcare, but like totally unprepared. Families just blindsided and disoriented.
Shoved off and abandoned is what it
Right.
feels like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And given up all hope and all of that. So, it got me thinking after, you do as much as you can in hospice to try to create a whole different experience for them. But some people are coming within hours to days of dying, and there's not a whole lot you can do. So that experience, as much as I love that bedside nursing, that experience is what really propelled me to say, I want to work upstream. I want to understand what is happening in a culture where we all know that every one of us is going to die. Like, what is happening? What are the different pieces that are at play here, and why this is so hard? And it's particularly this period of time of the last 50, 75 years when it has gotten so complicated. And so that's really been for many years now what has really drawn me is to understand both on the practical level, individual, family, community, but then the big picture culturally of how did we get in this situation where it is so hard to die, and it's not a cultural norm to talk about it, and we even aren't very literate around grief and the role of grief.
Yeah. What it makes me think of is, whose stupid idea was this? How did we get to this point? But
Yeah,
so
right.
when we say upstream, for listeners who are not familiar with the healthcare system, what we're talking about is trying to have conversations about serious illness and end of life wishes earlier.
That's right.
And it makes so much sense. It makes absolute sense to do it earlier, because would you rather make a decision about CPR in an ambulance on the way to the hospital? Or would you rather do it when you have a minute, more than a minute, to sit down with your family and say, this is what I know about myself and my beliefs and my values. This is what's important to me. And I don't think I want this, or I do want this. And then you put it in writing, and then you give it to your healthcare providers.
That's right.
Doesn't that sound like a much better process than having a paramedic standing over you and asking your family, do you want us to do everything?
Yeah.
And God
Awful
only knows
question.
what everything with a capital E means.
Right.
But the answer is never going to be, nah, just let her go.
Yeah.
Well, of course we want everything, because otherwise we're terrible people.
Right. Or it just gives us more time to put off what I've been putting off, which is this impending anticipatory grief that is facing me.
Right.
Right.
Which is a terrible measuring stick. That's a terrible system to figure out what you want to do and how you want to communicate it.
That's right. Keeping someone alive so that I don't have to deal with the pain that is awaiting me. Or, families are complicated, and there may be conflict in different religious ideas or spiritual or moral reasons about what is right or what is not. So, it's a gift we give to the people who will be part of our inner care circle. It's a gift we give them when we give them some clarity. In that first chapter, we talk about, it's like a compass point. It's like a North Star. What matters most to you? And it's unique to you. It's not what matters most to your eldest daughter or to your sister or to your partner. Yeah. What matters most to you? And can the care that is provided to you be aligned with that?
You have a quote at the very beginning that says, it's by Stephen Covey. It says, live your life by a compass, not a clock.
That's right. That's right.
I like that.
Yeah, so upstream is not only time chronologically upstream and not at the last minute, like you said, but it's also upstream is also acknowledging that compass, that I don't have to wait till the very end of my life to focus on what matters most to me and on quality of life. I can use that same compass much earlier in the process of living with serious or chronic illness, still be addressing is this reflecting what I consider quality of life? Am I choosing treatments and a way that I'm living and interacting with the people in my life based on what matters most to me? Like those are good life questions. They're not just end of life questions.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Life questions. We're asking life questions, not just end of life questions.
That's right. I was at one point I was trained to work as a coach, a nurse coach, and I made this shift in my mind when a lot of the nurses were doing more kind of life coaching, and I realized, well, I'm also doing life coaching. It's just that I'm bringing in the reality of dying in some ways as the reality of our dying and mortality and planning for that as kind of a bringing in a little bit of sense of urgency.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it really is life coaching. It's talking about the things that matter most to us and how can I live now, today, in alignment with that, and how can I live based on what I think a good day today would be, whether I'm weeks away from dying or I'm years away from dying, whether I'm perfectly healthy, whether I have a very serious illness. That's the life skills part that I think we've kind of siloed, like end of life is over here. Oh, that's what the hospice people do, and they
Right.
do that ideally at the very last minute, and everything else is just this sort of do what you can and treat so that you don't die. And the whole question of who are you as a person, what matters most to you, who are the people in your life, what's the state of your heart, are you at peace, are there things we can talk about in terms of forgiveness and regret, what are you grateful for, all these like juicy quality of life questions, like where does that come into the care plan? And I think that's some of what has happened in our healthcare system that is not holistic. A lot of us wish it were more so, but what happens when we are really only addressing a kind of medical, technological, physical level of health? And so I think part of what I am seeking is to take some of that holistic quality of life focus from hospice and bring it much further upstream into all healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
And
I realize hospice is my favorite part of nursing. So I think everybody should be a lot more like us. And we are not perfect. So hospice is not perfect. We don't always get the conversations right when we do get people to have them. We say the stupid stuff just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And hospice people are human just like every other medical and clinical provider out there.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't always get it right. And I don't ever want listeners to think that, we hold hospice up as some shining paragon of perfection in care, because we do have our issues, our warts as well. But when it comes to talking about death and dying, we are pretty damn good at that.
Yeah. And what's amazing to me is how, for the most part, everyone on that hospice team has gifts in being able to talk about grief and loss and death and dying. You don't have to just be the chaplain or the nurse or the nursing assistant. That's one of the things that I love so much about working within hospice organizations, was the kind of person who was drawn to working there had a real interest. It doesn't mean that we still don't have our own existential fear of dying or our own blocks against feeling grief and pain, but that we're, by choosing to work there and to be surrounded by death and dying and grief and loss every day as part of our work, we're saying, this is a part of our humanity that I don't want to avoid. I want to be in there. Even if it's complicated, I want to try to make it a little better for people coming through. I want to help support them and hold them. I want to help naturalize this so they don't see this as a terrible tragedy and accident, but that this is part of life. And can we bring a little of that normalcy into it? I love that part of it.
Yeah, I do too. This conversation with Jan will continue after the break when she talks about the importance of communicating your values to your family.
This episode is being sponsored by Halo Care. Caring for a loved one at home can be both rewarding and overwhelming. At Halo Care, we're here to help you find the balance, combining technology and heartfelt support so aging at home feels safer, easier, and more connected. Our 24/7 Care Hub team is always just a call away, keeping families informed and seniors supported around the clock. From personal care and home safety to meaningful social connection, Halo Care gives you peace of mind knowing someone's always there. Whether you're supporting an aging parent or planning for your own independence, Halo Care empowers you to live confidently at home, surrounded by care that's compassionate, human, and truly personalized. Learn more at halocaregroup.com/USA or check the show notes for the link. Halo Care, where technology meets compassion and home feels like home.
So when you talk about advanced care planning, we do have a tendency to talk about it as a one and done. Right. You get your documents done, you get everything written down. You're finished. It stays in place for however many years through your illness, old age, whatever. But what we know is that circumstances change, opinions change, beliefs change, relationships change, conditions change, perspectives absolutely change. Those conversations are definitely in need of evolving as things move. How does an ongoing healthy conversation about end-of-life wishes look if it's done over time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a practical answer, and that is we often say to people on your birthday or on the first of the year or at Thanksgiving or, at a certain time that will remind you to look at it again and say, is that still important? Is it still the person who I said or people that I want to be able to speak for me, 1, 2, and 3?
Right.
Are they still in my life? Are they still capable of that? Have my ideas changed? Is it different now that I've been diagnosed with such and such, or that I'm 20 years older? So some kind of regular checking in, I think, is important. But the other thing I think is looking for those opportunities, like from movies or a book that you've read or a class that you took, or seeing what happened in someone else's life. Like, I saw what happened in Uncle Jack's death, and I just want to talk to you, whoever your close person is, about why that was so hard for me to see and why I would not want that. Or, my best friend Sarah and how she died. That was so inspiring to me. I just want to talk about what I saw happen and how important that would be for me. So noticing there's the regular check-in once a year or whatever, and then there are these more spontaneous opportunities to kind of check in so that these conversations don't feel like one big kind of imposing doom. Instead, can be like, this is how we do life, is we notice things, and we talk about how that's important or not important to us, and that talking about how we die can be part of that. And I've been struck, for example, in social media by the conversations that are coming out of this new TV show, The Pit, and even Dying for Sex. That was a really interesting TV series as well, that a lot of people were talking about things. So I really encourage that more spontaneous, organic, take advantage of that to have maybe a smaller conversation that is about values and meaning, but is still addressing really important things that will inform the people in your life about what matters most to you. And in fact, those smaller conversations over time about your values and what would be important to you, I think are more helpful for the people who are speaking for you than your advance directive, because there's talking about that whole gray area that we don't talk about enough in healthcare, that most of us, it's not going to be clear cut like, oh, that's what you said in your advance directive. No, we're not going to
Right.
we're not going to start our heart again. Yes, that's helpful for the very last heartbeat and the very last breath, but all those other decisions where you may not be able to speak for yourself, and the medical team may come to you as the daughter who is listed as the power of attorney, medical power of attorney, and say, we could do this particular treatment, what would your mom want? And if you've never talked about that, and it's overwhelming to be, especially a non-medical person in a healthcare system, you'd be like, I have no idea.
Yeah. What would you tell me to do? Yeah.
Right, exactly. But if you've had these conversations that were these small kind of values based over time about what your mom would want or not want, that helps inform you. Like, I remember we talked about that after that movie, and she was so clear.
Yeah.
She said, if I can't,
Right.
recognize anyone anymore, please don't force feed me, or, whatever the situation is. So, that's, I think, part of what we're trying to get at with this idea of conversations is how can we move away from the advanced directive model, which is that's the conversation, and
Right.
instead see it as part of being human, part of being in human community, human family, part of being friends, part of being a responsible adult.
Right.
Can we change the narrative about talking about death and dying?
Yeah. Advanced directives should just be a very small part of advanced care planning.
Exactly.
But I think maybe it's the other way around. I will tell you that, when you talk about it, sort of organic events that would prompt conversations, definitely media culture, TV shows, movies, things like that, things like The Pit, where these issues come up. But going to funerals and memorials, I think, is one of the biggest ones. And I've done it to my husband as well. You go to a funeral, you're at the graveside, you've done the service and everything, and you get in the car and you look at your person you're with and you say, if you ever do that to me, I will rise up and haunt you for the rest of your life. I've said it to my husband. There are things that happen. We get in the car and I'm like, don't you ever let that happen to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just make sure our people know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Using what's there.
Those are
Yeah.
not things that there's a legal document for. You have
That's
to
right.
make sure that your decision makers and your people that speak for you are the experts in what you want.
That's right. And how do you, what do we say? Like in narrative medicine, there's something, we must ask the questions that invite the story, right? So how do
Yeah.
we know what is going to matter to someone if we don't ask the questions?
Right.
Or we don't use a prompt, like something like going to a funeral or watching The Pit or something like that,
Yeah.
to talk about it. One thing I found really helpful when my mom was dying, she was very clear and had been very clear. We'd had a lot of open conversations over a lot of years about what was important to her and what wasn't. But I think going through that experience with her and working with her medical team, I got a bigger awareness of the difference between DNR, do not resuscitate, advanced directives, part of a living will, and all of that, and something that is called AND, allow natural death. So it's like the DNR and the advanced directives are really for the healthcare team. It gives them the directive. We're not directing the dying person, we're directing the healthcare team. Don't restart my heart, or do restart my heart if it stops, right?
Right.
But allow natural death is a whole different kind of directive, and it's not the same kind of legal document as a DNR in most healthcare systems. But there was a period of time when end of life professionals were trying to get A&D as a more common spoken of acronym, because what's fascinating about A&D, and this has really helped my sisters and myself with my mom was very clear she wanted to die a natural death. And that's complicated to do in modern times. Like, what
Sure.
is a natural death, right? But she was very clear. And so time and time again, we would come up to this point where people gave us a choice. We could do this, she could go to the ER, right? And we would say, our mom's strongest feeling was that she wanted to die a natural death. How will that, that was what guided us, that value of hers. And it was so helpful. We were clear that she would not want her heart restarted if it stopped,
Hmm.
but that we were following her directive at that point, which was, I want to die a natural death. And it was very helpful and helped me to shift the attention and understand the difference between a directive for a healthcare team and a directive for someone's compass point.
Yeah. Yeah, because she gave you the direction.
Yes,
She gave
absolutely.
you she gave you the, I don't know what you would call it, but the X on the map.
Yeah, like the true north, like this is
Yeah.
what we're heading for. And the reason it was important, and it was a reminder when I went through it with her, that there will be multiple places where you have to reorient yourself. Just
Yes.
like on a hike with a compass, you're not always walking directly
Right.
north.
It's easy
probably.
it's easy to get off track. But
That's
it's
right.
like one of those
Yeah.
algorithms that you start out, okay, so if the end goal is a natural death or allow natural death, and so the first thing is, okay, there's been a slight stroke. Here are your choices. Stay at home, manage it, or go to the ER, have it evaluated, treated, etc. Well, again, do you adjust? Does this
right.
allow for a natural death, or does it create complicated medicalized treatment that's not really part of a natural death? Well, no, it doesn't allow for that. So
That's right.
that makes your choice. You know which way to go.
Yeah, that's a really good example of that.
Yeah,
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 of the algorithm. Really, that's a really good way to say it, because that's what we're walking into in the healthcare system. There is a kind of algorithm. That the trouble is that often that option on the algorithm of don't go to the hospital or don't treat or don't pursue surgery or whatever is often not talked about as much.
right. People don't even think that's an option.
That's
And
an option.
no is
Right.
always a choice.
That's right. And even a pause just to reflect is an option, unless it is someone's heart is going to stop.
Right. There's so much urgency in these decisions. I get it.
Yeah.
And I get it,
Yeah.
because we don't ever want to minimize the suffering that can happen on the part of the patient or the caregiver, the decision maker, with having
Right.
to figure these things out and feeling pressed for time or money or literacy inside healthcare treatments. Yeah, it's none of it's an easy lift. We know that.
No, and it's become so complicated. We can live so much longer with serious illness, so there are a lot more decisions we never had to make. Right, we have those options, and then it's also complicated because care and caregiving and who is doing the caregiving has gotten complicated as we're living longer.
Yes.
And as we live away from extended family, and as we are more isolated, and more people who are aging solo, and all of those things, it's gotten very complicated. And I don't see a way through that doesn't involve more open conversations.
Right. I agree.
It just makes it just takes one layer of stress and worry, lifts it a bit. It doesn't mean that suddenly we've fixed that. It's complicated to be sick in this country. It's expensive to be sick. It's expensive to be cared for. I'm not looking to fix that. I'm just holding one, along with many other end of life, professionals, just holding one part of the big cloth. But talking more openly is something, on one hand, fairly simple that we can do on a regular basis, but also really hard to do, it turns out.
Yeah.
So we need coaching on what it looks like.
We do. We absolutely do. Jan, I want to ask you, after supporting so many people, companioning so many families as they walk through end-of-life issues and death and dying, how has your own relationship with mortality changed?
Oh, man. I mean, what a privilege to have witnessed what I've witnessed, because it just has affirmed a lot of things for me, confirmed a lot of things for me. One is why I care so much about these conversations and more transparency, is because I have seen how complicated it can be. So helping me to focus on, I want to be a part of this upstream approach to talk more honestly and openly so that there isn't as much crisis. That's been a major gift that I've received of finding my place. Yes, it's 40 years of doing this end of life work, and I'm kind of following some breadcrumbs. So grateful for that. But in terms of my own mortality and how it has personally, not professionally, affected me, you know, my dying is right in front of my face by working at end of life. It's always there as a reminder. And that's a gift because I can fall asleep to that like anyone else, but the chances of me falling asleep to it are smaller because I'm reminded all the time how quickly life can change, how young people can be diagnosed with very serious illnesses and die suddenly, how older people can really suffer with long years of diminishment and pain and dementia. And, you know, I don't want to ever take for granted what I have right now. And that's a beautiful reminder of working at end of life. And yet, even with that, I like to say fall asleep, like I did a moment ago, fall asleep to it and forget and act like I have all kinds of time. But I'm so grateful for that. And one other thing that has really impacted me is to watch the many acts of generosity, kindness, caring, compassion that have come in all kinds of unusual ways. In families, both birth families and chosen families, among friends, among, with crusty old veterans who you realize underneath are these very soft, caring, scared men. There's so many ways that I've been able to witness these facets of humanity coming through compassionate care and kindness and in so many different forms, and that's a boy, that has changed me. It's given me a lot of hope in when it comes down to it, that most people can find care and compassion to give even when they're scared. And I feel so lucky.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing space to work in.
It is.
Yeah.
And so many surprises.
Jan, how can listeners find your book, Dying Matters, 8 Conversations That Can Change Your Life?
Well, 2 ways. We self-publish through Amazon, Kindle Direct Publishing. So Amazon.com is one. There are a couple local bookstores in Asheville and in Boulder, Colorado, where both Trish and I live that have our book. But Amazon is the easiest way to get it. And one way we're recommending is through our website, which is deathdoulas, plural.com. And there's a tab there for our book. And on that webpage is not only a link directly to Amazon, but also more information about the two of us and links to some of the podcasts that we've been on as well. But there's also, I believe it's now 11 different tabs that you can click on for a one-page PDF you can download for professionals to use this book in ways they may not have. For example, we had talked about coaching and life coaching. There's a tab for life coaches, how you might use this to help people clarify their values and priorities and help them in terms of maybe feeling stuck or bringing in a reminder about the preciousness of everyday life, things like that, and funeral directors and healthcare professionals and faith community leaders and on and on. So that's a really nice resource, I think, for people to think outside the box, that this isn't just a conversation for hospice people. This is a conversation for humans. And how do we do that if we're not used to it? And how do professionals who might not normally be having these conversations, how might they benefit from sharing this book with others? So that's also on that webpage, deathdoulas.com.
Well, I'll put a link in the show notes so listeners can go straight in and find it.
Ah, that's great.
Jan, I love the energy that you bring to end-of-life work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this conversation and for the work you have done over years to bring these conversations. You're a model of how to have these conversations in all kinds of different shapes and forms with different people, but that are getting at a lot of the key important questions of what does it mean to be a human and care for each other, and what does it mean to be more prepared for the last part of life. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes, and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.